He didn't bother to look back, but pointed the gun straight at the head of that cursed creature and said, "I have a hostage too, you bastard." Seeing him threaten his wife like that, the man screamed, "Wife!" He flew into a rage, pressing Luolan tightly against himself and cursing right in his face, "Damn it, put the gun down." And so, the two of them stood there, yelling at each other. Tianxin said, "Release the person first." The other man defiantly shouted, "Don't even think about it." Tianxin, furious, pressed the barrel of the gun close to the zombie's head and said, "Then I'll send this monster to the afterlife." At that moment, the creature seemed to be stirring, its survival instincts kicking in. Is it trying to survive? It sensed the danger to its own life, squirming and growling, its mouth screaming Roah. Suddenly, that sick man started crying like a child missing his mother, groaning, "Please don't shoot, I beg you. I can't live without her." In a cold voice, he replied, "Then release her. I give you my word as a man that this creature will not die." The man now realized he wasn't joking, and quickly said, Okay, I'll exchange the hostage with you. Just don't shoot." While the two continued to argue, the zombie still wriggled and struggled uncontrollably. The two of them gradually walked closer, and the expression on the face of the monstrosity turned a deep shade of purple. Neither of them said anything more, only the sound of their shoes echoed, clopping along the ground. Suddenly, a tearing noise rang out from somewhere. It turned out that the creature had torn apart the cloth that had been binding it. It resembled a wild animal that had been chained for a long time, and it began to howl as if it had never had the chance to do so before. The three of them were like trees rooted to the ground at the sight before them. After struggling for a while, the creature finally freed itself from the tangle of ropes. It let out a roar like an unvaccinated beast. Tianxin, noticing the strange noise behind him, turned around. The perverted man, seeing the monster he called his wife thrashing around, immediately screamed, "My love!" Taking advantage of his distraction, Luolan bit into his hand, causing blood to spurt out. He clenched his hand tightly, groaning in anger, "Ah!" Luolan seized the opportunity and ran away from this deranged man. At this moment, Tianxin's face was colder than ice. Without hesitation, he drew his weapon and aimed it directly at the creature's face, freezing it in place. Oddly enough, the zombie-like creature didn't charge at him but just stood there, staring. The cruel lover rushed over with a panicked expression and shouted loudly, "Stop!" Bang! The sound of a gunshot shattered the atmosphere, and it seemed like the bullet had struck the head of the zombie. However, the soldier used his own body to shield it. If it weren't for the global pandemic, he would surely have been a good husband. Yet, life is never like a dream, for the wife he loved now was nothing but a soulless zombie. Standing before this heartbreaking sight, Tianxin and Luolan were left stunned and amazed. After the deafening gunshot, the force of the bullet caused the man to lose his balance and fall heavily to the ground. His face looked as dry as a monkey's. A few minutes later, drops of blood trickled down onto the ground. Struggling, he managed to crawl to his feet and said, "Honey, are you okay?" The monster slowly moved toward him. The moonlight was shining down as if it were illuminating the twisted love between monster and man. Suddenly, he remembered the time when his wife had first been infected. Her hands had trembled with fear. She whispered to her husband, "Please, please. Kill me. I can't live anymore." He gently comforted her, "Don't say that. It will never happen. You'll be fine." Her tears flowed like a river. She lowered her head and begged her husband, "Kill me, I don't want to become a monster that kills you." He simply held her tightly and whispered in her ear, "Why would you say that? No matter what, you must live." Back to the present, they were just like before, but life is inherently unjust. The wife, whom he had loved so deeply, was no longer in this world. In her place was a monster that only knew how to bite. He stared in horror. The monster wasted no time and bit straight into the man's neck, causing a gush of blood to pour out. Tianxin and Luolan, who stood outside witnessing this scene, were both startled. Luolan even stood there, mouth agape. The man was pinned to the ground by the monster, gnawing at his flesh as if it had been starving for billions of years. Although he had lost all consciousness, his eyes could not close, with veins of blood clearly visible in his pupils, as though he had suffered the greatest shock of his life. Tianchen and Luo Lan stood frozen, watching the scene before them, the monster gnawing on the body of the man who had once been her husband. Tianchen raised his gun and aimed directly at the monster's head. With a single shot, the bullet struck its head, ending its miserable life. The mood of both of them had plunged to the lowest point. Luo Lan even lowered her gaze, displaying a look of pity for this family. Seeing her in such contemplation, Tianchen also stood by to comfort her. Don't think too much. That guy and her were already dead, they had no emotions or feelings at all. He turned his back and spoke aloud, let's go. Luo Lan quickly followed Tianchen. She unconsciously turned her head and looked back at the corpse of the man. Suddenly, her voice trembled as she softly spoke, why has the world become like this? If there hadn't been the pandemic, Ding Bing would have lived happily with his wife. Tianchen replied, his tone somewhat cold, yet there was a trace of comfort in his words. He said, you're right. If there hadn't been the pandemic, surely you, I, and Gao Fei would be living normal lives. Perhaps we'd be attending school right now. He took a cigarette from his coat pocket, slowly lit it, and said, but this world has been overrun by the pandemic, and that is the truth. He looked up at the sky, exhaled a puff of smoke, and spoke to her, Luo Lan, listen, right now, just remember one thing, which is to do whatever it takes to survive. In the stillness of the night, the two of them pondered their lives. It was unclear how long it had been or when Tianchen's group had returned to the broken-down car parked by the riverbank. At this moment, Tianchen was taking a drag of his cigarette, while Luo Lan was diligently working on the car. Suddenly, a hand appeared in front of Luo Lan and shouted, Wrench, hurry up. It turned out to be Gao Fei's voice. Luo Lan pouted and replied, are you sure you know how to fix it? He adopted a pompous tone and answered, didn't I tell you? When I was 10, I already knew how to fix a bike. The camera angle shifted down to the soft, delicate legs of Luo Lan. Below, Gao Fei's face was completely red, and he wore a lecherous expression, even laughing stupidly. Luo Lan, upon seeing the perverted man leering at her, stood frozen with her mouth agape, her eyes wide open at the situation. She immediately threw the wrench right at Gao Fei's face and yelled, what are you pervert looking at? Behind the car, the sound of insults still echoed throughout the area, yet Gao Fei didn't back down and retorted, you think I want to look at those flat chests of yours? Luo Lan, furiously enraged, cursed back, how dare you talk about my flat chest? I curse you to marry a wife with a chest as flat as two parallel lines. Ha ha. Tianchen, who was smoking, sighed deeply. These two really are something. Then he stood in contemplation, raising his hand thoughtfully, since I successfully reached level 1 in evolution, I haven't made any breakthroughs. Maybe these kinds of fights aren't enough to level up. Time passed by just like that, when suddenly the sound of Gao Fei's voice broke the silence. It turned out that he had finally finished fixing the car without having another argument with Luo Lan. Beside him, Tianchen also complimented, that was fast? Gao Fei scratched his head and replied, what do you mean? I can even disassemble a tank. This car is nothing, like drinking milk. Before he could enjoy his moment of pride for too long, Tianchen interrupted, alright, let's go. Gao Fei, surprised by his response, awkwardly said, huh? At least you could compliment me a little? Scene change. The three of them had reached the gas station. There, monsters were walking down the road as if they were casually strolling in a parade. On this side, Tianchen was standing in a pose, using binoculars to survey the situation. Gao Fei, noticing that he hadn't spoken for a while, asked, what's over there? Tianchen replied, a few monsters, nothing too dangerous. Luo Lan sat there, unresponsive. Suddenly, Gao Fei felt something was about to happen to him and instinctively glanced at Tianchen. Tianchen met his gaze. Their eyes locked for about 5 seconds, and Gao Fei's expression turned teary, as if he was about to cry. Meanwhile, Tianchen wore a malicious grin, looking back at Gao Fei. He unconsciously snapped, "What are you looking at?" Tian Shen remained calm and, with a disgruntled tone, said, "Don't mind it, I was just sharing some good ideas earlier." Upon hearing this, Gao Fei nervously lowered his voice, "Don't be like that, hee hee." A while later, Gao Fei was equipped with 2 knives, but strangely, he was trembling like a dog that had just been splashed with cold water. Tian Shen truly was the savior of this group. He sat confidently on top of the car, puffing on a cigarette and said, "If you want to evolve quickly, the best thing is to join the fight." Gao Fei, feeling disheartened, replied, "Do we really have to do this?" Luo Lan, hearing him, jumped in, "You're a man, aren't you? What are you afraid of?" Before Luo Lan could continue, Tian Shen raised his hand toward her and said, "Don't worry, this beauty will come with me." Hearing him, she jumped up in surprise and exclaimed, "Huh? What?" Her face turned ashen as she said, "Why do I have to go too?" Meanwhile, Gao Fei's soul was floating in the clouds, and Tian Shen wore an indifferent expression as he said, "Just go. Don't waste time. There are only a few useless monsters anyway." Hearing Tian Shen speaking, Luo Lan immediately pointed at the group of monsters and shouted, "These are just a few?" He took a drag from his cigarette and said, "None of them have evolved yet, they move very slowly, in the end, they're just small fry." Luo Lan still couldn't accept that she had to go into battle, and she kept pleading with Tian Shen. He coldly replied, "There's no buts about it." After saying that, he raised his gun and chambered around. With a gleeful smile, he said, "Remember, survival comes first." Luo Lan, once again, looked baffled, not understanding what he was trying to do. With a boom, the sound of the gunshot shattered the air, startling the birds nearby, which quickly scattered to find shelter. Luo Lan and Gao Fei were left open-mouthed at Tian Shen's actions. The monsters, disturbed by the loud noise, started rushing toward Tian Shen's group. Meanwhile, in another house, eerie screams could be heard from inside, revealing a monster crawling around in a blood-stained room. Suddenly, something strange started protruding from its back. A little while later, it broke through its outer layer and emerged. The scene before them seemed somewhat extravagant. The monster appeared even more ferocious now, with its spikes having grown longer than before. Perhaps this was the evolutionary form Tian Shen had mentioned earlier. Suddenly, a monster's severed arm was seen flying up into the sky. Not stopping there, the person also thrust a knife straight into the monster's mouth, causing it to spit out blood. Its eyes were bloodshot, and with a quick swipe, the knife in his hand easily claimed the monster's head. It turned out that this was Tian Shen's group, and the person who had taken the monster's head was Gao Fei. The two of them were now standing on top of a car, holding their ground against the wave of monster attacks. Unable to bear it any longer, Gao Fei shouted, "How many more of them are there?" Beside him, Luo Lan, while firing her gun, yelled, "Don't ask me." Suddenly, a zombie lunged from behind, catching Gao Fei off guard. He only managed to turn his head and exclaim, "We're screwed." The zombie charged at him like a wild animal, but before it could reach him, it was stopped by 2 blades from Gao Fei's knives. Gritting his teeth, he shouted, "Someone, hurry up and help me." Hearing the cry for help, Luo Lan turned back and said, "There are too many over here as well." Just then, a bullet shot through the zombie's head, leaving Gao Fei momentarily stunned. He turned his head in the direction of the bullet, curious to see who had just fired. It turned out to be Tian Shen. He was casually lying back with his legs crossed, sipping water, looking completely unfazed. Truly the image of a master who was squeezing every last drop of energy from his workers. Seeing Gao Fei in a daze, Tian Shen immediately shouted, "What are you looking at? Losing focus in the middle of a fight will get you killed." Gao Fei didn't have time to react because a horde of zombies was chasing him from behind. So, the two of them, Gao Fei and Luo Lan, worked together. One used 2 swords to take down a monster, the other fired 2 bullets to drop one. They fought from dawn until dusk, not knowing how many zombies had met their end, only that by this point, both of them were so exhausted they collapsed, panting heavily. Gao Fei asked about the situation, while Luo Lan could only weakly mutter that he was still alive. When they had finished off the monsters, Tian Shen jumped down to finalize things for them. He approached and said, "No rest yet, we're going to refine the virus through breathing exercises, get up now." Hearing this, both of them complained, "You're so cruel, have you lost all your humanity?" Tian Shen, unfazed, continued, "You're already whining after just this? Well, then I'll make you train even more. Also, when did your hatred flare up like this? I'm sure you didn't eat the mara fruit, did you? And why are you both shouting in unison now?" Tian Shen immediately entered a cold, indifferent state and shouted, "Do it now, make their momentum dissipate." After some time, the two of them finally agreed to cultivate. Tian Shen stood in the middle, observing their progress. The streaks of blood, seemingly alive, moved throughout Luo Lan's body. Tian Shen, witnessing this scene, couldn't help but sigh, indeed, like father, like son. Just like Luo Hang, it's the speed of evolution. Suddenly, he turned his gaze elsewhere, landing on Gao Fei. He hadn't shown any progress yet. At this moment, his expression slightly changed as he pondered, maybe he needs to be in a different place for him to evolve? The more he thought, the more it gave him a headache. He couldn't help but rub his head, how could evolution be this random? It's definitely not possible. Suddenly, he sensed something unusual and directed his gaze toward that spot, so it's the house with the monster from before. He stood there, thinking silently to himself about his two companions. This feeling is hard to put into words. He left Luo Lan and Gao Fei behind to search for an opponent, not forgetting to take a little vitamin to boost his lung power and slay. By this point, he had arrived at the house. The area around the house was quite clean, with no sign of the monster anywhere. Suddenly, Tian Shen noticed the smell of blood rising from inside the house. He opened the door and began to step inside, gripping his knife tightly in his hand. On the floor, dismembered corpses were scattered everywhere. He walked through the house, stepping over the bodies. Just then, something lunged at him from behind, startling him so much that his soul almost left his body. He literally flew. Something had crashed into him with such force that it smashed through the window, sending him flying outside. The impact was so strong that he coughed up blood. Perhaps for the first time since being resurrected, he was in such agony. He had no strength left to retaliate and tumbled a few rolls on the ground. Even so, he still gripped both knives tightly and cursed, "Ah, damn it, it hurts so much." Tian Shen used both his hands and feet, summoning every ounce of strength to stand up. He looked toward the interior of the house and shouted angrily, "Who did this?" It seemed something had gotten into his eyes, and his expression changed. From a battle-hardened gaze, his eyes now reflected astonishment as he stared at the creature before him. It was a monstrous being with 12 spikes protruding from its body, resembling a mutated durian. The creature's arms were adorned with sharp barbs, and its mouth twisted into a sinister grin. Tian Shen couldn't stay calm and cursed directly, "Damn it, the monster in front of me is a special type of mutation, a beast that prefers to fight alone, but it's incredibly strong." Tian Shen was also serious about fighting, knowing that it was unlikely he would make it out of this alive. The beast seemed to understand his fear, and it gleefully puffed out its breath, which hadn't seen a toothbrush in years, mocking him. Whether Tian Shen could smell it or not, his face turned completely dark. Suddenly, it charged at him, throwing a punch in his direction. The scene in front of him was no different from an ant trying to take on an elephant, with their difference in size being massive. On top of that, it was a mutant species. His wounds hadn't even healed, and now he had to fight again, his face contorting in pain worse than a monkey's backside. Its punch knocked him down, and he rolled a few times before stopping. Quickly, he used a tree stump for leverage to push himself up and retaliate. With a swift motion, he gripped his knife tightly and charged at the monster. Tian Shen immediately executed a surprise attack from behind, aiming to catch it off guard. With a swish, he sliced off several of the monster's spines. The zombie sensed the pain, its eyes narrowing into a glare as it turned to look at Tian Shen. Tian Shen, after delivering a strike, hadn't even had time to fully process what had happened when, with a loud thud, a monster punched him straight in the stomach. The tremendous force shattered his sword into countless pieces. But that wasn't all, he also coughed up a mouthful of blood. The impact of the punch sent Tianchen tumbling, rolling like a shrimp coated in batter, ready to be thrown into a frying pan. The beast strutted over to where Tianchen was lying on his back, helpless, as if ready to put him on the chopping block. Tianchen, clutching his stomach, cursed through gritted teeth, "Damn it, the gap in strength is just too huge." At this moment, the zombie stood right in front of him, grinning grotesquely. Tianchen was still struggling to get up after the punch when the zombie let out a shrill roar and raised its muscular, veiny fist toward him. Just then, a gunshot rang out loudly, causing Tianchen to be momentarily stunned. If it weren't for that shot, he would have been on his way to the afterlife by now. The zombie howled like a rabid animal, its red eyes now pierced by the bullet. It stood there, screaming uncontrollably. The shrillness of its cries was so intense that Tianchen could barely keep his balance. As he looked past the creature, his eyes widened in shock, and he blurted out, "What's that? That figure looks so familiar." And so, Tianchen's expression was one of bewilderment. He couldn't help but exclaim, "That's..." So it turns out that Gao Fei is a womanizer. His face looked completely bewildered, utterly stupid. He was still holding two guns, the smoke still rising from the barrels. Tianchen couldn't help but exclaim, "Gao Fei." Before he could say more, Gao Fei proudly spoke up, "He didn't expect that, did you? I can be useful sometimes, you know." Suddenly, he stopped goofing around and, instead, fired rapidly while shouting, "Tianchen, get out of the way." The gunshots rang out continuously, but it was unclear what was happening. It turned out that while Tianchen was still stunned by the scene, the zombie had seized the opportunity to ambush him. Instantly, dozens of bullets were shot into the zombie's body. Tianchen dodged while turning around to assess the situation. He thought, even from this distance, how is he able to shoot so accurately at the monster's head? The gunfire didn't stop, and more bullets kept piercing into the zombie's head, while Gao Fei fired haphazardly, shooting everywhere. Tianchen ran while shouting, "Find its weak spot." Immediately, Gao Fei responded. The two worked together smoothly, coordinating their efforts. Gao Fei knew what needed to be done and called out, "Hold it off." From somewhere, a stone was thrown straight into the zombie's face, causing it to shriek like a pig being slaughtered. Tianchen did not forget to turn around and say, "I'm here." At this moment, the zombie seemed to come back to life. Although both of its eyes were blind, it could still sense the human presence around it. Without hesitation, it immediately adopted an attacking stance and swung its fist toward Tianchen. The force of the punch sent Tianchen soaring into the air, with debris flying in all directions. However, being tossed up like that didn't cause him to lose his advantage. Tianchen quickly adapted and reacted. He focused on the zombie's head and kicked it straight in. Before he could stabilize his position, the zombie grabbed his leg, causing him to lose his balance and pulling him back toward it. This creature was clearly meticulous. No longer toying with him, it swung its fist at Tianchen, intending to take his life. Tianchen used every ounce of his strength to dodge, knowing that if he took another blow, his life would be over. The zombie began to torture him, dragging him back and forth. Tianchen continued to scream, praying that Gao Fei would come to his rescue. Meanwhile, Gao Fei stood at a distance, observing the zombie's every move, looking for its weakness. I wonder if this monster was a Marvel fan before. It's reenacting the scene where Loki is being tossed around by Hulk. Then Gao Fei, as if sensing its weakness, suddenly opened his eyes wide as if enlightened by the party. So that's where it's wounded, at the neck of the monster, injured by the shots just now. He shouted at that very moment, and immediately, dozens of bullets were fired straight towards the zombie. Instantly, two bullets followed one another and lodged directly into the creature's head, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Like a puppet with no more strings, it collapsed to the ground. Tianchen finally broke free from the zombie's grip and collapsed, gasping for air. Gao Fei, unable to hide his joy, exclaimed, "Did I really do it?" The zombie, still clinging to life, trembled. Tianchen struggled to get up and walk toward it, saying, "You're a tough one, huh?" He then grabbed its head, using all his strength to squeeze. After squeezing for a while, he pulled its head back up, making the zombie seem as if it feared nothing. But now, it realized its life was about to end, and it raised its hands, begging Tianchen. Then came the scene of Tianchen, straining every muscle in his body, pulling at its head. After much effort, he finally managed to tear its head off, taking the bones with it. Without hesitation, he threw the head away like a pile of trash. Gao Fei hurried over and asked Tianchen, "Are you okay?" He brushed off the question and spoke up, "I've succeeded." Breathing heavily, he continued, "So, is that your ability after the evolution?" Gao Fei didn't respond but instead stared directly at him. He bent down, picked up a stone, and then said, "Do you see that leaf falling?" Seeing that the question was completely unrelated, Tianchen also asked, "Huh?" They both waited until the leaf detached from the tree. Immediately, Gao Fei inhaled deeply, gathered momentum, and flicked the stone from his hand, sending it flying toward the falling leaf. Thud! The stone hit the leaf and pinned it to the tree. Tianchen was a bit surprised by the scene. As for Gao Fei, he struck a pose and asked, "What do you think?" Tianchen immediately pulled him toward himself and ruffled his hair, praising, "Ah, so you really are impressive." Gao Fei grinned widely, pleased, hee hee. At this moment, if we were to look into his eyes, we would see the wide-eyed, innocent look of a fawn in Gao Fei's gaze. It seemed like Tianchen was training him. He spoke up, asking, "Do you see anything there?" He quickly responded, "Yes, yes." It turned out he was measuring the distance that Gao Fei could see. Having figured it out, he read out the numbers clearly, 52, 6, 18. He confidently patted his chest and said, "This distance is no longer an issue. After evolving, the movements of those monsters now appear slower to me, while everything around is much clearer, even a fly is distinguishable." Tianchen explained to him, "That's a breakthrough in eye power, an evolution of the nervous system, not the limbs. You're truly not ordinary." Tianchen placed his hand on Gao Fei's shoulder, as if encouraging him, and said, "Let's go rest now. I'll get you a sniper rifle." At this moment, Gao Fei's gaze faltered slightly, but a faint smile appeared on his lips. He clenched his fist and spoke, "Finally, I can be of help to you." Hearing him speak so softly, Tianchen immediately slapped him on the back and said, "What are you talking about? We're friends, after all." Gao Fei lowered his head, pondering for a few seconds. Finally, he smiled gently and extended his hand toward Tianchen, saying, "Tianchen, no matter what the future holds, I'll follow you." Seeing his friend, who had once risked life and death, act like this, Tianchen was somewhat surprised. In the end, neither of them needed to say anything further, both of them smiled faintly, and deep down, they surely both knew that they would forever be good brothers. On Luolan's side, her complexion changed slightly, as it seemed the evolution process had slowed down more than usual. She remained seated, meditating amidst the mountain of monster corpses, completely motionless. Suddenly, the aura around her shifted, and the blood veins that were spreading across her body began to rise. In an instant, her eyes opened wide, and her pupils were no longer normal, turning a dark purple-black, giving off a very eerie vibe. She could no longer bear it and screamed uncontrollably. Around her, smoke began rising from her body, billowing into the sky, with a sizzling sound, as if her flesh was being roasted. Upon noticing that something was wrong with her, Tianchen's expression changed, and he gritted his teeth. Both of them immediately rushed to where Luolan was and shouted, "This isn't good." In a hurry, they asked, "Luolan, what's happening?" Tianchen explained, "The process is too fast, her body can't handle it and is going berserk." Hearing this, Gao Fei couldn't stay calm and shouted, "What should we do now?" Tianchen sat down next to Luolan and said, "There's no other choice. We have to use it." With that, he raised his hand, gathered momentum, and slapped her, as though a mother were punishing a child who had been sneaking off to play video games. A slap made Luolan spit out a mouthful of saliva, scattering it everywhere. However, Tianchen's expression showed no sign of regret. This must be how effective the physical therapy was. Luolan immediately regained her senses and cried out, "It hurts, it really hurts." Right after that, she screamed and cursed, "You're crazy, Gao Fei. How dare you hit me?" Gao Fei, who hadn't even touched her, was completely baffled, but he ignored her accusations as she continued, who else is planting sweet potatoes in this land? Meanwhile, the real culprit was casually standing by, smoking and taking in some lung-cleansing, tuberculosis-killing puffs. He was just watching the two birds argue. Gao Fei repeatedly denied it. It wasn't me, it was Tianchen who did it. But Luolan firmly insisted, you nasty piece of work, Tianchen would never hit me, would he? Seeing that things were spiraling out of control, Tianchen, exhaling smoke, said, stop hitting him already. If I hadn't slapped you back then, you'd probably be crazy by now, turned into some kind of monster. Upon hearing that, Luolan stopped. However, Gao Fei's face had turned unrecognizable. Who knew if his parents would even recognize him now? After venting her frustration, she said, I'm letting you off the hook just for Tianchen's sake. Gao Fei, feeling wronged, sighed, this is personal vendetta. Tianchen turned around and spoke, let's go, tonight we'll sleep at the gas station, and tomorrow we'll set off. Suddenly, the scene shifted back to the past, and now there were the hands of someone. It was Gao Fei when he was young. From the situation, it was easy to tell that he was being bullied by a group of kids. The girl that Gao Fei had affected screamed loudly, ah, pervert. As for him, he was still confused because he had only reached out his hand, but the fat kid had sneered and pushed him forward, making things even more chaotic. The two other boys saw this and burst into laughter, saying, gee. She continued to shout, your son, the little rascal, dared to molest my daughter. You people should just die. Gao Fei couldn't bear it anymore and spoke up, but aunt, I really didn't do anything. Someone pushed me. She immediately screamed, liar. I will definitely report you to the school and have you expelled. Gao Fei's mother couldn't take it anymore and pulled him away, saying, hey, I haven't finished talking yet, who gave you the right to leave? At that moment, the two of them walked out of the unjust school. Suddenly, the soft voice of his mother spoke, making Gao Fei widen his eyes in surprise, Mom believes that I didn't do it. The image of his gentle mother appeared in his mind, her hair half platinum blonde like a princess from the snow-white forest. She continued, I know my Gao Fei would never do something so despicable. Unable to hold back his tears from his mother's comforting words, they streamed down his face. Seeing this, his mother sat down and gently comforted him, let's go home, what would you like to eat tonight? I'll cook it for you. Breaking out of his reverie, he opened his eyes, and the scene changed. Now, the three of them were sitting in the car, heading somewhere. Seeing Gao Fei lost in thought, Tianchen asked, what are you thinking about? He replied indifferently, don't mind it, just old stuff. Tianchen immediately noticed that there was something strange in his brother's words and attitude, so he also changed his expression. Eventually, the three of them made their way to G District, following Gao Fei's directions, and stopped at a certain apartment complex. They stood there, observing the situation. 2 minutes later, Tianchen spoke up, we have to be very careful, there are definitely monsters around here. He turned to his pet and said, you stay here. Then he walked up to Gao Fei and said, if anything happens later, pay attention to my orders. Got it? Gao Fei, loading his gun while pouting, his face tense, replied, I'm not sure if my parents are safe. Seeing that Gao Fei had lost all resolve, Tianchen reassured him, they will be fine. Now, focus on what's ahead. After finishing their weapon preparations, Tianchen reminded them once more, pay attention to every movement. No matter what happens, we must not let the monsters detect us. However, the scene before them was nothing like they had imagined. On the ground was a pile of monster corpses, all of them dead, their bodies scattered throughout the hallway. The three of them were puzzled and asked, what's going on here? Tianchen answered coldly, someone has been here. Looks like they've already left. Gao Fei, sensing something bad, turned pale and shouted, no. Gao Fei ignored the previously discussed plan and ran straight towards his house, not sparing a second to look back. Seeing him act this way, Tianchen and Luolan also called after him, shouting, where are you running off to? They continued chasing after him, yelling loudly, wait up, you fool. The sound of their footsteps pounding up the stairs echoed relentlessly, as though they could hardly breathe. Tianchen still tried to call him back, knowing there could be more danger lurking in the house. Suddenly, both of them stopped in front of a group of monsters sprawled out on the ground. They stood there, glancing around, searching for where Gao Fei had gone. Tianchen spoke up, "He's fast, isn't he? He should have been here." Just then, a scream echoed throughout the house, coming from a room brightly lit by a lamp. The two of them sensed that something was terribly wrong and rushed to investigate. As they ran, they called out, "Over here, Fei's in this room." Before their eyes was a scene of continuous gunfire, with smoke billowing from the gun and filling the entire room. It was Fei, in a frenzied, panic-stricken state, shooting at something. By now, Tianchen and Luolan had entered the room where Fei was wildly firing. Tianchen stood frozen, his eyes wide, and whispered, "Fei?" In Gao Fei's eyes, there was the silhouette of someone, a figure illuminated by something blindingly bright, their limbs twisted unnaturally. He could no longer maintain his composure, his face turning ashen. His legs could no longer maintain balance and gave way, collapsing onto the ground. As if that weren't enough, he let out a cry of pure agony, "No!" Before him was something that caused a man who always wore a smile to break down in tears and scream in despair. Tianchen immediately ran over, asking, "What happened?" Suddenly, his gaze shifted toward something, his eyes locked onto the bathroom, the place that had caused Gao Fei to lose control. It was horrifying. Before him stood what seemed to be a bathroom, yet surrounding it were the dismembered corpses of monsters, their bodies hacked beyond recognition. In the center hung a woman, chained and suspended upside down. Gao Fei collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down his face. He cried out in anguish, "That woman! She's my mother!" Her body was no longer whole, with bite marks from the monsters scattered across it. Tianchen and Luolan, standing nearby, could hear Gao Fei's heart-wrenching cries echoing with pain. He continued to sit there, sobbing uncontrollably, mourning the loss of the mother who had always protected him, always loved him, and was now gone. Luolan stepped forward to comfort him, while Tianchen approached the corpse, saying, "Someone must have fed something to these monsters, causing them to tear her apart." Gao Fei had yet to calm down, his tears and snot flowing uncontrollably. Tianchen silently turned away, for he was the leader of the team. If he broke down, no one knew who could lift them up again. At this moment, Luolan couldn't hold back and gritted her teeth, cursing, "What kind of beast could be so?" Suddenly, Gao Fei fell silent and slowly stood up. Luolan, not understanding what he was about to do, called out, "Gao Fei, what are you planning to do?" Without a word, he brushed past Luolan and walked towards Tianchen. He approached the body of Gao Fei's mother, tears continuing to fall from his eyes. He reached out with trembling hands towards the corpse, calling out her name. Suddenly, the pupils of his mother's corpse moved, and her eyes slowly opened. Tianchen immediately sensed something was wrong and rushed to stop Gao Fei, knowing that his mother had already transformed into a monster, with no thoughts left in her mind. What he witnessed left Gao Fei in a daze. He stood frozen, staring at the figure before him, the woman who had once been his mother, now transformed into a monster, rushing towards him to tear him apart. The monster bared its teeth and howled wildly at the people in the room. Gao Fei couldn't accept this cruel reality, and his breath slowed for a moment. He could only lower his head, refusing to acknowledge the harsh truth, murmuring, "No, no, mother." A moment later, he clenched his fists tightly and muttered, "Damn it." It seemed that he had turned his pain into hatred. His gaze was now more dangerous than ever. He ground his teeth and cursed, "Damn it, you bastard." Then, without saying another word, he turned his back and ran out of the room. Tianchen and Luolan both spoke up, trying to stop him. Seeing their efforts were in vain, he raised his gun to the ceiling and fired. After the gunshot, he finally stopped and listened to them. Tianchen spoke first, pressing, "Where are you going now?" Gao Fei coldly replied, "I'm going to find that bastard." He screamed, "Kill them all." His eyes burned with bloodshot fury. Hearing his words, Tianchen responded loudly, "That's nonsense. Do you even know where they are? How many of them? Do they have guns? Do you know? Don't be reckless like this. Do you want to die?" I know you hate them, but blindly rushing in like this won't solve anything. Seeing that he had calmed down, Tianqian lowered his voice, walked over, closed the door, and said, "Now, we're going to do this." He then aimed the gun at the room and said, "Rest in peace." And then, the sound of the gunshot rang out. Everyone knew that this would be the only way to bring relief, and also to let Gao Fei's mother rest in peace. They silently sympathized with the plight of the mother and son, and Luo Lan's gaze lowered in sorrow. As for Gao Fei, his mood had undoubtedly reached rock bottom at this point. The scene shifted, and the sunset began to descend. The three of them had finished building the grave where Gao Fei's mother would rest. He still couldn't stop crying because this was the mother who had raised him since he was a child. Tianqian approached to comfort him, saying, "Don't be sad, it seems like you've forgotten something. Your father isn't dead." Hearing this, Gao Fei suddenly came to his senses and remembered his father. He immediately rallied and said, "That's right, my father must still be alive." Luo Lan also spoke up, "Gao Fei, has your family ever had any enemies?" He stood up and pondered, "Enemies?" A little later, at some abandoned place, the sound of beating and punching could be heard. A man was being tortured by a group of people to the point that his face was deformed, his body covered in bruises. At that moment, two men entered the door and said, "Boss, we brought the old man here." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps stomping loudly shook the house, followed by a shout, "Gaoji!" The man struggled to crawl up to see who it was. As soon as he saw this person, he cursed, "So it's you." In front of him stood an obese man with a rooster-colored hair, puffing out smoke from his cigarette. He gritted his teeth and said, "You dog." The man bared his golden teeth and sneered, "Ha, I never expected a dog like you to end up like this." He lost his composure and rushed toward the man, cursing, "Beast with 12 assholes, I'll risk my life to deal with you." But before he could reach the obese man, he was struck by a powerful punch, crashing to the ground, blood flowing freely. The man cursed, "You're truly a fool." At that moment, several of his lackeys dragged Gao Ji out of his sight. The man then turned to the one with the youthful, short hair and asked, "What about his wife?" The man with the cruel smile replied, "I followed your instructions, tied her up, and let him witness his wife being devoured alive by a monster." The obese man bared his pig-like teeth and grinned, "Huh, good, good." Then he pulled out a shining golden watch and showed it off, "Boss, this old man isn't so bad. I found this brand new one." Yet the obese man was unfazed and said, "You've worked hard, just take it and use it." The young man with the short hair grinned with pleasure and replied, "Thanks, boss. In that case, I can only obey your order." Scene change. At this moment, the car with the three people inside was speeding along at a terrifying pace, and there were still voices coming from the car. "Fatty Wei, never heard of him." Gao Fei, holding his head, said, "He's a competitor of my father's company. He has a criminal record from back in the day, known for being a big shot in the underground world. In short, he's despicable. He had some backing but still lost to my father. He was involved in selling counterfeit cigarettes and alcohol, and my father caught him. When the police were called, he ended up in prison. In the end, only he holds a grudge against my father." Tianqian spoke up, "In this situation, a normal person would break into your house to steal food, necessities, and weapons, but no one would go so far as to hang someone up to be eaten by monsters. This is definitely an act of revenge. Grudges have a source, debts have a master, and he must have a grudge against your parents." Gao Fei then said, "My parents are very easygoing, friendly, so it must be that Fatty Wei, no one else." Suddenly, Tianqian slammed on the brakes and sharply turned the wheel, causing the car to spin 360 degrees. His expression hardened as he gritted his teeth and said, "All right, give me the map." The map appeared, with 3 areas circled in red. 1 was the flour mill, 2 was the dam, and 3 was the old city. Tianqian spoke up, "I've marked out 3 locations. Let's head there now." Luo Lan took the map and asked in confusion, "The dam, the flour mill, and the old city. Why these 3 places?" He began to explain, 2 weeks have passed since the catastrophe, and these are the only 3 places left in G District where people might be hiding and still alive. They must be there. Gao Fei gritted his teeth and said, Fatty Wei, where the hell is he? Tian Chen replied, we don't know his exact location yet, but finding him is just a matter of time. Which building around here is the tallest? Suddenly, from the towering building, the sounds of a fight and gunfire erupted. Whoosh! A monster was hurled into the sky, and with one more kick, 2 more monsters were sent to the scoreboard. It turned out to be Gao Fei, slaughtering the monsters as if he were venting his frustration. Tian Chen stood quietly, watching him. Luo Lan asked, Brother, do you think Gao Fei will be alright? He slowly replied, Right now, there's nothing we can do to help. Let him kill freely, it's probably good practice for him. The scene unfolded with a staircase full of the corpses of monsters. By this time, the trio had reached the rooftop. Tianxin spoke up, This place isn't bad at all, from here you can clearly see the dam. Moreover, we can observe the other 2 locations as well. Gao Fei suddenly said, It's them. Tianxin turned to ask, Have you seen your father? Look over there. Tianxin puzzled, Is that the flour mill? Gao Fei replied, Yes, do you see that white car? That car belongs to my father. I'm sure after they killed my mother, they took him away. Tianxin fell silent, then said, It seems infiltrating there won't be easy. The defenses are very tight. If we're not careful, we'll be detected, and things could get worse. Gao Fei slammed his hand down on the railing, gritting his teeth, Even if I have to die, I'll kill all of you vile bastards. Tianxin patted his shoulder, speaking softly, I didn't bring you here for you to commit suicide. You have to stay calm, only then can you save your father. Suddenly, Luo Lan excitedly shouted, You two, look over there. They quickly rushed over and asked, What's going on? Luo Lan continued pointing in a certain direction, urging them, Hurry up. As soon as he glanced at the place, Tianxin exclaimed, This is the supply shipment. 1 week after the outbreak of the pandemic, the governments of many countries began sending relief supplies, and our country was the first to receive these aid packages. Tianxin quickly urged the group to go to the warehouse to unpack the goods. Now let's see how our luck holds up. Let's just open it and hope there are some essentials. There are explosives, ammunition, canned food, everything you could think of. This is great. He picked up a gun in his hand and sighed, Not bad, an automatic rifle with a maximum range of up to 15 meters. This is really suitable for your enhanced eye power. After saying this, he handed the rifle to Gao Fei, surprising him a little. Gao Fei stood there, staring at the gun, while Luo Lan and Chen Fei continued rummaging through the supplies to see if there was anything else useful. Suddenly, something caught his eye, and he exclaimed, This is. He brought the scope in front of Gao Fei and asked, You know how to use this, right? Gao Fei hesitated before replying, Yeah. After a while of fumbling, he finally managed to attach the scope to the rifle and stood there, admiring it. Tianxin continued, Luo Lan and I will go there first, you stay here. Hearing that he was being left behind, he suddenly shouted, Stay here? What do you mean by that? Tonight, I'm the one who should avenge them. Tianxin calmly lit a cigarette and said, Use the gun properly. When the time comes, you can call me a friend. Your enemies are my enemies. Once the revenge is done, it's done. Tears welled up in his eyes after hearing Tianxin's words, and he shouted, Tianxin, this favor, Gao Fei, will never forget. You also said it once, brothers, always brothers, don't hesitate. The scene shifted to nighttime, with patrolling soldiers and cameras keeping strict watch at the entrance. The 3 of them crouched behind a car and whispered, Do you see anything? He responded, Yes, my eye power now can fully observe in the dark. His eyes glowed like a pair of night vision glasses. The image revealed 3 men, all armed, but it's strange, they're only carrying Type 97s. They should have been equipped with more weapons. Luo Lan frowned and said, 3 rifles? This definitely requires a plan. Suddenly, Tianxin stood up abruptly, startling Luo Lan a little. She immediately whispered, What are you doing? Hurry up and crouch down, or they'll notice us now. He looked down and replied, just wait until you reach stage 1 of your evolution, and you'll understand in situations like this. As he turned his back, he said, no need for a plan. At this moment, the guard on duty was fast asleep, while the young-haired guard walked up and said, night shifts really are tough. One of them yawned and said, I just want to sleep for a bit, but there are monsters everywhere, we can't leave our posts. This guard yawned so hard that tears came to his eyes, but something made him startle. Below him, Tian-chan was walking towards them. The three guards were now asking each other who this little devil was. The bearded, strange-hatted guard then shone a flashlight on the approaching figure. The light hit Tian-chan as if a top-tier celebrity was stepping onto stage. They were shocked to see he was human. One of them yelled, Kiddo, what are you doing here? He ignored their threats as if they were nothing more than barking dogs, casually putting his hands in his pockets. The bearded guard screamed, Stop! If you don't, we'll shoot your head off. He stood tall, hands still in his pockets, unfazed by their barking threats. The young man lost all patience, raised his gun, and said, Humph, time to die. Before he could pull the trigger, a bullet suddenly shot through his brain. The two others, still confused, hadn't figured out what was happening. In unison, they shouted, It's a sniper. It turned out the bullet was fired by Gao Fei. Tian-chan crouched down to gather momentum, then, with a swift move, he leapt up to their wall. He landed on the ground like a superhero. Seeing him standing there in the open, they immediately raised their guns, ready to shoot him on the spot. But before they could get close, he quickly grabbed the collars of both of them, yanked them back, and slammed their faces into each other, knocking them unconscious. The two guns fell to the ground, and Tian-chan glanced over at Gao Fei. When he signaled that the situation was handled, Gao Fei confirmed that it was safe. Tian-chan then turned back to retrieve the guns, replenishing his team's weapons. After a moment, he gathered with his group, ready to move on. He felt the noise from within meant they might have been heard. Turning once more, he added, Be careful when I come back later. Gao Fei, while reloading, replied, Don't worry. His gaze hardened, I'll kill them all. Not a single one will escape me. At this moment, the scene unfolds with the overweight man squeezing something. It turns out that a woman is lying on his belly, saying, You're really mean. The overweight man chuckles, delighted, and laughs in a high-pitched voice. Suddenly, a bearded man rushes in, shouting, Boss, there's trouble. The overweight man, still not lost in his desires, responds, Speak quickly. The man shouts back, We've been attacked. Immediately, the overweight man throws the woman off the bed and yells, What? Who's attacking? Lin Shan? The bearded man quickly confirms, I don't know, they're sniping at us. We've already lost 4 men. As he quickly puts on his clothes, the overweight man is astonished, What? Sniping? He then screams and curses, Gather all the men quickly, move fast. The scene shifts to the guard gate, where many soldiers are gathering on either side of the entrance. 2 men are arguing and pushing each other to see what's happening. One of them curses, Are you trying to get me killed? I want to live a few more years. The man, unable to take it any longer, shouted, Useless scum, I don't believe there's any monster or anyone daring enough to come here. As soon as he finished speaking and stepped out the door, a bullet struck him straight in the abdomen, causing blood to spurt from his mouth. He collapsed to the ground, and the other man, standing in the doorway, trembled so violently that his face turned pale, like a bullet had just passed through him. It was Gao Fei's shot. His gaze grew sharper as he counted the lives of their enemies. The overweight man, using binoculars, cursed, How many of them are there, damn it? The henchman trembled and replied, I don't know. He immediately slapped him hard across the face and cursed, Useless trash, is this why I keep you around? Then he yelled out, All of you, move out now. The sound of heavy footsteps rapidly approached Gao Fei's group. He observed the situation and said, This is bad. Luo Lan, puzzled, asked, What's going on? At this moment, about 20 men were charging toward them. They rushed forward like ants swarming out of their nest, heading straight for the spot where Gao Fei's group was hiding. Luo Lan's face darkened, and he said, "There's too many of them. What do we do now?" Gao Fei immediately shouted, "Run now!" A man wearing a banner labeled Leaf Village saw only 2 people and exclaimed in surprise, "Huh?" He then pointed toward them and shouted, "Look over there, it's them! Hurry, chase after them!" At that moment, the man with a dumb expression and the one with his head down, face buried, rushed to chase after the 2 of them. Tian Shen, standing high above, observed everything, with the moon behind him adding to his impressive presence. Meanwhile, the 2 subordinates were lighting cigarettes and whispering to each other. "I just heard gunshots. It sounds like there's a fight at the main gate." The other replied, "Looks like it's Lin Sheng again. He's the cop who has been causing trouble for the boss repeatedly. It seems there's another fight. But the boss only caught the first guy, Gao Ji." Tian Shen, by now, had jumped off the wall and rushed straight toward the 2 subordinates. One of them, sensing something strange, gasped loudly. It turned out he had unknowingly found himself standing between them. He then threatened, "Don't move, don't scream. If you do, I'll break your neck. This place. It's called the Spine, right?" He pressed his sword against their backs as a threat. The 2 men, now as pale as babies' bottoms, dared not utter a word. Tianchen continued, "I didn't study medicine, but I know one thrust through here, and a person becomes a vegetable." Then he smiled and said, "How about I deal with you first?" The man was now sweating profusely, his voice trembling as he replied, "No, I don't want to." Seeing that they had started to fear, he asked, "I have 3 questions I want you to answer. Is Gaoji still alive? Where is he? Who is Lin Sheng?" The man stammered, This. Tianchen then threatened, "Spill it quickly." The cowardly man quickly confessed, I'll tell you, Gaoji is still alive, he's locked up in the factory warehouse." He immediately questioned, "A warehouse?" The man pointed towards a building and said, "Over there." He asked again, "Then who is Lin Sheng?" The man, now trembling, answered, "He's from the county police station, very capable. He helped the police find the stronghold near the ancient city walls, saying something about building a new civilization." Tianchen pondered, "Lin Sheng, huh? I've never heard of this person before." He then continued with a cold tone, "I have one last question for you." The 2 men immediately nodded and replied obediently, "We won't hide anything." Tianchen then asked in a chilling voice how they wanted to die. The 2 men turned pale upon hearing this, and one even frowned deeply, looking like an angry monkey. With a sudden motion, his sword was stained with blood. And of course, these 2 had no lives left to spare. He immediately walked towards the building where Gao Fei's father was being held, prioritizing the rescue first. A moment later, he stood in front of the door, silently thinking to himself, "This must be the place, but why does this workshop feel so strange?" Just as he was feeling confused, a quarrel echoed in the distance. Even if this little brat Gao Shi wasn't dead, he must have gone insane by now. It turned out that one person with patty field-like hair and another with a crew cut were talking as they crossed the valley. "I wouldn't last a day in this place either. I can't believe the boss actually managed to find this cursed place." The other person gestured for him to speak quietly, saying, "Shut up, are you tired of living?" Tianchen quietly crept behind the 2 and made his way towards the warehouse. He stood there for a long time, sensing that something was definitely off about this place. He raised his hand to the door, muttering, 7, 8, 9 cents. A few seconds later, his eyes snapped open in panic as he gasped, "Inside, there's a horde of bloodthirsty monsters, and the man is trying desperately to escape." At that moment, the man seemed to be completely exhausted, having been beaten to the brink of death and now facing a pack of monsters. It was already midnight, and there were still sounds of shouting and whispering from the group. The man wearing glasses spoke first, "Who goes up first?" Then the bald man shouted loudly, "What are you so angry about? Everyone go up, even if it's just him, he can still wipe us all out." The man from the back spoke up, "What if there's an ambush inside? He might be waiting for us to go up there." The bald man immediately responded, if we can't take him down, the boss won't spare us. The group then followed each other into the building. Suddenly, a bullet struck the head of one of them, another success for Gao Fei. The others stood around the body, confused. In Gao Fei's eyes, anyone who moved now would have to die. Then the bald man shouted, he's up above. As soon as he finished speaking, the group started firing wildly, forcing Gao Fei to flee. He turned back to provoke them, and they shouted to each other, chase him, he's alone. The overweight man, furious as if bitten by a dog, yelled, damn it, I can't stand this anymore. Gather another group and capture him. If we can't kill him, don't come back here. A man immediately ran over to report, boss, it's bad. He has his hands clasped behind his back and says, what's going on now? Then he shouted loudly, all the brothers guarding the workshop are dead. At this moment, the anger caused this obese man to become so furious that veins were popping out on his pig-like face. What the hell? Damn it! Bring someone with me. The man behind immediately complied, yes, yes. Suddenly, a fist broke through the reinforced glass door. It turned out to be Tian Chen, who was looking for Gao Fei's father. Finally, he found him. He was hiding on top of a light bulb, while below, a whole group of monsters was waiting, ready to devour him alive. He called out, Gao uncle. Gao uncle, hearing a voice instead of the usual monster howls, murmured, a person. Tian Chen, noticing Gao uncle's reaction, explained, I'm Gao Fei's classmate, Tian Chen. At this point, the man, physically and mentally exhausted, mumbled, Gao Fei. Tian Chen bent down and said, sorry for the trouble. He then lowered a rope and descended to where Gao uncle was hiding. The landing didn't go smoothly, causing the metal plate to shake. He gritted his teeth to maintain his balance. Below, the whole group of monsters was waiting for them to fall, ready to kill them instantly. He immediately stepped forward and called out, Gao uncle, I'm here to save you. He then extended his hand towards the man. At that moment, the man suddenly reacted abnormally, quickly retreating in fear and shouting, don't come any closer, don't come here. Finally, the man had crawled nearly right up to the metal sheet. He shouted loudly, Gao uncle, stop right there. He stepped forward and pinned the man down, saying, it's dangerous ahead, don't move. He silently thought to himself, he's been tortured so much that his mind is unstable. The man continued to struggle to break free. As he held him down, he thought, no wonder ordinary people go mad in this place. Breaking off his thoughts, he struck the man hard at the back of his neck, sorry about this. With that blow, the man lost consciousness. At that moment, the sound of hurried footsteps approached, and they were even bringing swords with them. He also noticed and said, that was quick. By then, the group had gathered in full. The overweight man bared his yellow teeth and said, not bad, you've got some skill. Daring to save someone right in front of me. He set Gao uncle down and coldly said, so you're Fatty Wei, huh? I was just wondering where to find you, and now you've walked right into my trap. Truly a fat pig. The bodyguard following immediately tore his shirt and said, boss, don't get angry, let me handle this kiddo. Then he started massaging and squeezing, speaking to the man in front of him, kiddo, do you think you can beat me by yourself? Served in the army, or are you just some kid who just popped up at a martial arts school, that's why you have the guts to come here and stir trouble? Haha, what's this about defending justice? You've been watching too much TV, haven't you? Let me tell you, killing people is no longer illegal. Before he could finish, he took a punch straight to the face that left his teeth and lips a mess. The force of the punch sent him flying about 5 meters. And now, who knows if his parents would even recognize him? The obese man and his subordinates, at this moment, either feared or were furious as they witnessed the scene. After taking that punch, he instantly lost consciousness, his teeth and lips all mixed up. Tian Shen, with his fists still smoking, turned to the group and said, that's right, killing people is no longer illegal. He pulled out his 2 swords and struck a slashing pose. Standing in front of him were the group of people now drawing their guns and swords to intimidate him. The obese man then commanded, what are you standing there for? Go deal with him. But Tianchen wasn't afraid of anything, because to him, these people were no different from ants fighting with an elephant. He charged forward, using his first breath, I am your father. One by one, he requested their heads, and even their limbs. The obese man kept ordering his subordinates to take his place, but the more they came, the more fun it became. With every strike of his sword, 1 life was taken, with 2 swords, 3 lives were claimed. Then, someone tried to sneak up behind him, raising a gun and sneering. Tianchen glanced behind, flicked his sword, and the man's head flew off like popcorn popping fresh from the pot. The obese man immediately opened fire, shooting relentlessly. Die, die. It's death for all of you. Tianchen then unleashed his 7th technique, all things give birth to life, I will kill every last one of you. One by one, they fell, some split in half, others decapitated. The obese man winced like a monkey's backside as he watched his subordinates drop one by one. He wondered to himself, who the hell is this stray dog? Tianchen cast a deathly glare at the obese pig, causing him to squeal like a pig, preparing for the slaughter. Scene change. At this moment, the battle of Gao Fei's group is still ongoing. Bang Z brother, are you sure they are still here? It's way too quiet here. This guy, drenched in sweat, spoke up. Didn't I already tell the people up ahead? Then they entered the room. Luolan immediately spoke, Gao Fei has another team now. He replied, I see it. One man kills another, and before them lay the bodies of the henchmen who had fallen. The group entering then said, no way, it's this horrifying? Suddenly, one of them entered Gao Fei's line of sight, but the watch that came into Gao Fei's camera lens made him frown for a moment. Luolan noticed his unusual expression and asked, what's wrong? Gao Fei replied, that's my father's watch. Luolan slowly began to understand and furrowed his brow, it's him. What does this mean? Gao Fei couldn't hold his composure anymore and shouted, you damned dogs, I'm right here. Gao Fei gritted his teeth and cursed, bunch of bastards. The guys below, still unaware that death was about to visit them, mocked, I thought it was someone important, turns out it's just Gao Ji's idiot son. He immediately asked, where is my father? They stood there, laughing as they replied, if you want to see your father now, it's fine. The man stuck out his tongue like a dog and mocked him, now, if you obediently cross your arms and endure the restraint, I'll let you and your father reunite. Anger surged through him as he clenched his fists, causing blood to spill out. Luolan, seeing his state, quickly stopped him, Gao Fei, don't get agitated. He's deliberately trying to provoke you. The man below, hearing a woman's voice, lifted his dog-like snout and said, there's another girl here. Gao Fei lowered his head and said, don't worry, I'm very calm now, calmer than ever. He then spoke, I ask you all, is it you who are behind what happened to my family? The man let out a vile tone and said, you saw it yourself. Then it's great, isn't it? Trying to enrage him further, the man raised his voice and continued, your mother is tied up over there. Then, she was bitten to death by zombies. Hearing the despicable words coming from that bastard's mouth, Gao Fei bit down hard on his lip. Deep inside, he was certain that he wanted to crush this bastard. Luolan, standing beside him, called his name, hoping he would calm down. He stood there, red-colored energy swirling around him. Gao Fei immediately said, quick, go find somewhere to hide. With that, he grabbed a gun and said, all of you must die. Then, he jumped down and charged toward them, aiming for their faces. The group, seeing his reckless actions, immediately turned pale with fear. He didn't just hold one gun, but 2, and rushed toward them, firing relentlessly. 2 of them, who were waiting for the situation to escalate, took bullets to the head, while the third one almost wet himself in terror. As Gao Fei hit the ground, 2 more fell dead. They raised their guns and began shooting back fiercely. But for someone like him, evolved beyond ordinary limits, it was like swatting flies in front of an eagle. He immediately began analyzing the trajectory of the bullets, seeing them all coming clearly. He dropped to the ground, dodging their shots, and fired back, shouting, die. The sound of a gunshot rang out, and one of them fell lifeless. Now, they understood fear, their faces darkening as one muttered, "This is impossible, is he even human?" Gao Fei continued his massacre, and the room was now littered with corpses. One of them, terrified, dropped his gun. Gao Fei stepped closer, like the Grim Reaper approaching to claim a soul. The man, now only capable of groaning, begged for his life. On Tian Shen's side, the obese man was tied up and writhing like a pig about to be slaughtered. The ground was still littered with the bodies of his soldiers. As usual, he kept screaming, "What do you want to do? I have plenty of food here, let me go, and I'll give you everything." Tian Shen didn't answer. He dragged him somewhere. A moment later, they arrived at the room where Gao Fei's father had been held earlier. Upon seeing this familiar scene, the obese man groaned in terror. He yelled, "The keys to the food storage are in the basement, in the safe. Don't throw me down there." Tian Shen approached him coldly and said, "I'm not interested in your little food supplies. I'm here for revenge for Gao Fei." The obese man muttered, "Gao Fei?" Tian Shen threatened, "I want to know how Gao Fei's mother died. Today, you will pay for everything." With that, he kicked the man down. At this point, the man could no longer act arrogantly. His teeth had been knocked out, and his body was bruised beyond recognition. He kept screaming as if it were his last time. And waiting for him was a pack of monsters eager for a hearty meal of this fat pig. Tian Shen stood above and observed, then said, "Those who create their own karma cannot survive, it's time to go back and find Gao Fei." On this side, there were trembling hands begging for mercy from someone. It turned out that it was the young man with the twin-colored hair, whose face had completely distorted by now, with teeth and lips all mixed up. Gao Fei smiled and proudly showed off his six-pack, with red streaks of evolution visible beneath. He coldly asked, "Who else is in my household?" The man managed to crawl up awkwardly and murmured, "Almost all of them have been killed. The remaining ones are with Mr. Wei, not at the place of the fat man." He sat down and said, "Then it seems the blame falls on you, doesn't it?" The man immediately cried out, "No, it's that fat man. He ordered me, I was just a gopher. Spare my life, I was just a gopher. Please." He continued to kneel, banging his head on the ground in atonement. Luo Lan, standing beside him, could only call out Gao Fei's name. Gao Fei grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up, saying, "You don't have the right to bargain." After saying that, he raised his fist toward him and shouted, "Go die." Suddenly, the red marks vanished without a trace, which took him by surprise. He spoke in pain, Is this the rebound effect?" Luo Lan immediately ran over to assess the situation. "Gao Fei, you're in pain," and collapsed to the ground. The man saw this and immediately ran off. "Don't worry about me, go after that guy." He then said, "Luo Lan, hold on, I'll be back soon." She reloaded her gun and said, "Kill him." He pointed towards the man running away, and Luo Lan instantly gave chase. Meanwhile, Gao Fei, his face covered in sweat, gasped for breath, exhausted. Eventually, he collapsed unconscious. At that moment, the man with the messy hair took a sharp turn and sprinted away. He used all his strength, as though drawing from every ounce of energy since the day he was born, hoping to escape Luo Lan's pursuit. Then, a gunshot rang out from somewhere, and a bullet struck him square in the hand. The pain shot through his brain, causing him to scream out in agony. He glanced at his face, which was bruised and swollen, and turned to see who had fired, so it was Luo Lan. While firing, she yelled at him to stop. The man, his hand throbbing with pain, could only curse as he kept running, "Damn it, I'm being chased by a little brat." Then he curled his legs up and started running again. Luo Lan didn't give him any chance to escape. She kept closely following behind and shouted, "Don't even think about running." At this point, he was cornered, and whenever he saw an alley, he would dive into it without thinking. Suddenly, he screamed out loud. It turned out that he had fallen off the building. At that moment, Luo Lan also arrived, not quite understanding what had happened. Then something caught her off guard. It was Tian Shen, carrying Gao Fei's father on his back. She shouted, "Tian Shen?" She rushed over and asked, "Is this Gao uncle?" He confirmed, "Yes, that's right." Then he turned to look at the person lying unconscious on the ground and asked, "Who is that?" She explained to him, "That's the culprit who harmed Gao Fei's family." He looked down and snarled, "Him?" Suddenly, there was a coughing sound from behind. Luo Lan sighed in relief and said, "Gao uncle is awake." But the man's attitude was a little strange. He jumped off Tian Chen's back and yelled, "Don't come here, don't come closer." He hid in a corner, muttering, "Spare me." Luo Lan asked him, "Why are you acting like this?" He immediately explained to her, he is experiencing some agitation, and it's possible his mental state is a bit unstable. She cursed aloud, "What a scumbag, truly despicable." Suddenly, the man, the leader of the gang, moved his limbs again, and he sighed, "What a lucky life, still alive." But what he didn't know was that right before him was Tian Chen. He opened his eyes wide in shock, and for a moment, his face turned pale with astonishment. Tian Chen raised his sword and said, "There's no chance left." The gang leader raised his filthy hand in surrender, begging for mercy. Suddenly, a figure appeared from somewhere, shouting, "Bastard!" Both of them are also confused, not understanding what's going on. It was Gao Fei's father. He struggled to stand and said, "Is it you? Is it really you?" He charged forward, grabbing the scumbag by the neck, shouting, "It's you, isn't it?" The man had no strength to resist anymore and muttered, "Gao Ji." Then he took a punch directly to the face. As the punch landed, the father cursed, "You bastard."